BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Friday, another Cooper Friday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Fridays, I talk to you guys about D.B. Cooper, the man responsible for the only unsolved skyjacking in U.S. aviation history. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about D.B. Cooper. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Box Ned. In this episode, I will be discussing the book and story, The Confession of D.B. Cooper by Ray Burns. And yes, that's Ray Burns, not Ryan Burns. And this is one where fact meets fiction. Every Wednesday, I talk to you guys about Jack the Ripper here on Black Box Online Radio, Ripper Wednesday, and there are several stories and books that I've talked about and explored. Some of them that explore this type of fact versus fiction mentality would be I, Ripper by Stephen Hunter, the autobiography of Jack the Ripper by James Carnac, and Ripper by Dean B. Cloud. And what these books try to do is they try to get inside the mind of the perpetrator and write down what this person could have been thinking when they committed the crime. So that's exactly what Ray Burns has done with this creation here, The Confession of D.B. Cooper. It tells the story of a journalist who is conducting his own investigation, and he has tracked down and identified the real D.B. Cooper, and he gets a confession out of him, which is something that's very informal. We're talking about two men sitting together on a park bench. They actually meet in a cafe first, and D.B. Cooper tells this journalist, "Okay, I'll tell you everything, just get me a coffee black with 1 sugar." And I think that these things are a very interesting mental exercise because they do show a possible scenario that could have been created. And of course, I'm interested in how the author chose to create this type of personality. Why did the author think about the very specific points? The first thing that I noticed in Ray Burns' creation for The Confession of D.B. Cooper is that he doesn't give any name to the man Cooper whom he has identified. He is just presenting this as the mental thought process that D.B. Cooper could have been experiencing on the plane back in 1971. So, let's look at some things. Number one, he estimated that D.B. Cooper would have been 34 years old. He's sitting down with D.B. Cooper, and he's like, well, I'm not sure why everybody thought that I was in my 40s or even mid-40s. He stated that Cooper was 34 years old. That's the first point. And the second one is that this was something that was done very nervously. Like D.B. Cooper's reported to have had nerves of steel. He is cool, calm, and collected. But the character that was presented by Ray Burns states very clearly that he was nervous the whole time. He almost chickened out. He drank the bourbon and soda on the plane to calm his nerves, and prior to getting on the plane, he thinks that he is going to chicken out. Point number 3, he chose the Pacific Northwest for strategic reasons, and that is that D.B. Cooper skyjacked the plane that was going from Portland to Seattle. Then, once he obtained the money and the ransom, he said that he was going to go to Mexico. When they weren't able to go to Mexico, they agreed upon Reno, Nevada, and then he parachuted out into the night somewhere over the Pacific Northwest, never to be seen or heard from again, to everyone's satisfaction. And he said that he chose the Pacific Northwest because he was familiar with the terrain, familiar with the area, and that it would have been a suitable place for him to jump. But this is one thing, though, that even somebody like me has some mixed feelings about. And that is that he states that D.B. Cooper committed this skyjacking not even for the money. The money was like the secondary reason. He wanted the money, but that wasn't the primary reason why Cooper committed the skyjacking. The first reason was sexual inadequacy, sexual inferiority. He felt rejected by women. All of this stuff is laid out in The Confession of D.B. Cooper by Ray Burns when he is saying that he did it because he thought he would be more attractive to women if he had the money. He felt that his love life was in shambles, and this was one of the ways to get out of it. So, I mean, I think that this is some really interesting stuff because on Cooper Fridays, I like to end the show talking about the book The Skyjacker by Dr. David G. Hubbard. And what that book was attempting to do was to create a set of psychological observations about skyjacking. In fact, that book wanted to become the premier force for the psychological profiling of skyjackers, and all of that stuff is talked about in The Skyjacker. And I'm going to get back to the book later on. As I said, I normally conclude Cooper Friday episodes with some stories from Dr. David G. Hubbard, but with this confession, it's saying the exact same thing. Yes, he wants the money, but he wants the money so that he will be more attractive to women. Now, this is a story that isn't going to be completely satisfying to everyone. I hope that I misread this, but what it sounds like he was saying is, this is D.B. Cooper talking to the journalist, that he gets on the plane, he's nervous, and he wants the bourbon and soda to calm his nerves, but he hands the flight attendant a note that says he has a bomb in his briefcase, but that says that he gave the note to the flight attendant, Tina Mucklow, and that he didn't find her attractive. But, I mean, I would really hope that I misread that because, of course, the real D.B. Cooper gave the note to Florence Schaffner, and she's the one who just thought that this is some businessman trying to hit on her and she's not interested, but she's going to be polite about everything, so she just ignores it, and then that's when he says, "Miss, you better take a look at that note. I have a bomb." So, I mean, that's just like kind of a detail that isn't necessarily about the thought process of D.B. Cooper, but it definitely shows that D.B. Cooper is thinking about the women that were on board, which I'm sure that he did. I mean, unless your suspect is Barb Dayton or something, I think D.B. Cooper was definitely checking out the flight attendants and trying to get involved in some type of very quick and twisted fantasies, I kid thee not. So, with D.B. Cooper's actions, he's on the plane, and in the confession that has been created by Ray Burns, D.B. Cooper jumps out, and it is a thrilling experience, but he knows that he can survive. When he jumps out at 10,000 feet, he recognizes that this is something that is going to be fairly possible and fairly doable. And the reason for this is that he has a certain amount of knowledge of aviation, specifically the airplanes. And, you know, one real advantage of this is that he knew about the Boeing 727 and he knew certain features of it. Although I think that the story, The Confession of D.B. Cooper, did misstate something that a lot of other stories seem to misstate, or even documentaries, and that is that Cooper knew how to lower the back aft staircase during the flight. And as I understand, he actually had help from Tina Mucklow, the flight attendant, to lower the back aft staircase, and he did not know how to operate that on his own. But I digress from that. So Cooper lowers the back half staircase with the help of Tina Mucklow, and he jumps out. He knows that he is going to get away with this. And this relates back to psychopathy, because in Dr. Todd Grande's psychological profile video on D.B. Cooper, he was talking about how D.B. Cooper had psychopathic tendencies. And when people think of a psychopath, maybe D.B. Cooper isn't the first person that's going to come to mind. Maybe they're going to be thinking about a psychopathic serial killer, maybe a dictator or some type of crime boss. But what Dr. Todd Grande wanted to point out is that D.B. Cooper did show psychopathic tendencies because he showed absolutely no regard for the people on the plane. I mean, he might be doing gentle things, but he's holding them hostage. He's saying that he has a bomb in the briefcase and he will kill people if he does not get what he wants, which was $200,000 and 4 parachutes. Oddly, in the story about the Confession of D.B. Cooper, it states that there were 3 parachutes, but again, I must have misunderstood something. D.B. Cooper had 4 parachutes, 2 fronts and 2 reserves. So, with this concept of psychopathic tendencies, Dr. Todd Grande also wanted to elaborate on this by saying that D.B. Cooper showed moments of tenderness, like saying, you know, that the crew can eat meals, and he is also offering the tip to Tina Mucklow, and she says she cannot accept gratuities. He is doing things where it seems like he is being nice. And this is one thing that was reported about D.B. Cooper. He's somebody who is acting like he is polite. He's being reasonably formal. And if I've understood Dr. Todd Grande's assessment, that was just things that were done to not exactly manipulate, but it's more or less deceive. I mean, you could call it an emotional manipulation. He's like, if you don't give me what I want, I will kill everyone here. But I'm just going to try and keep this light and gentle atmosphere. He's showing moments of tenderness to people, but they are only done so he can get what he wants. That is a psychopathic or sociopathic manipulation, because that's what sociopathic lying is all about. It's spinning a web of lies to manipulate and deceive. So, I mean, I wouldn't have thought that D.B. Cooper was a pure psychopath before I started Cooper Friday, but the more that I get under the surface, it seems like there actually is a lot of evidence that Cooper had very strong psychopathic tendencies. I don't know if he would have met the definition of being a clinical psychopath, but that's something that came up. And this whole concept that Ray Burns is sharing in the story, The Confession of D.B. Cooper, about how D.B. Cooper is jumping out and he knows that he is going to get away with this. He knows that he's going to succeed. That is something else that also comes about in fiction that is related to psychopaths. Because in addition to talking about D.B. Cooper and Jack the Ripper, I also talk about the Zodiac Killer here on BBOR every Monday. Zodiac Monday, Ripper Wednesday, and Cooper Friday. And on Zodiac Monday once, I looked at an interview with Kevin Spacey when he was talking about how he prepared for the role in Seven, where he played a serial killer. And the two things that he was told to keep in mind were that you are superior to everyone, and you are going to win. And that's the type of thought process that is laid out in the Confession of D.B. Cooper. D.B. Cooper is acting like he is superior to everyone, and he is going to win. He is not afraid to kill people. Or at the very least, he is not afraid to share this image of terror and just to absolutely let people think that they are going to be murdered. He is not afraid to terrify people, create the threat of murder to get what he wants. So in terms of that, I'm really noticing a lot of sociopathic tendencies associated with Cooper. But there is the whole concept of, did D.B. Cooper carry a gun on the plane? In the story, The Confession of D.B. Cooper, absolutely yes. He has a gun that is hidden and concealed that he doesn't bring out because he said it would have been very, dumb and dangerous to use a gun on an airplane. And I've even thought about that because when we look at other skyjackers, they aren't afraid to bring guns on the plane. Richard McCoy brought a gun on the plane for his 1972 skyjacking. Paul Sini brought a gun on the plane for his 1971 skyjacking. Paul Sini was the one who accidentally discharged the gun on the plane, and I would just be thinking that there would be so many complications with bringing a gun of any type on an airplane. Would it have been something practical to carry? Sure, but what if the bullets just accidentally went off and they just accidentally blew out a window or something that affected things that were associated with the plane's travel? Because if I can be very honest, I think that it would make sense for Cooper to want to have some type of weapon as a leverage point. If he wanted to take control of the situation and he wanted to hold a hostage at gunpoint, that would be necessary. But it would be very risky to use a firearm on an airplane. What if the firearm was accidentally discharged and he was taking out a window? What if the firearm was doing something that went haywire and he caused the plane to malfunction? Those things should all have been taken into account. And the fact that Paul Sini's skyjacking happened before D.B. Cooper, and then Cooper could have been aware from the news that bringing a shotgun onto the plane could have caused some type of damaging effect, or just seeing that in the news, and he would recognize that, all right, I'm going to have the gun as a backup weapon, but it's not going to be my primary weapon. And I think something like that would be reasonable. D.B. Cooper had a mystery bag with him. The gun could have been in there. D.B. Cooper was wearing not only his suit coat, but also a raincoat. The gun could have been concealed. And in the story, The Confession of D.B. Cooper, Ray Burns lays it out like this. D.B. Cooper spent the night before the skyjacking taking bullets for a handgun and strategically and carefully removing the powder from the bullets so that it wouldn't go off. In short, he had a loaded handgun with him, but the bullets that were in the handgun, the cartridges, were ineffective and it wouldn't have actually worked. Now, I don't really think that a real D.B. Cooper would have done that because he could have just carried the gun without loading it. He could have just carried the gun and not had the bullets in the magazine. He could have just done so many other things that would have required less effort, less time, and less time-consuming planning on that part. But in The Confession of D.B. Cooper, he jumps out of the plane. And this is one thing that I thought was very odd. Like, he's able to land, he's able to survive, he feels really good because he now has this $200,000, and he decides to plant money as a false lead at Tina Bar, of course. He actually plants it near the river, and really oddly, he takes off his jacket and he throws that into the river. And they stated this in the story, The Confession of D.B. Cooper by Ray Burns, that he threw the jacket into the river, but the jacket was never found. And I just thought, as a fictional writer, like as somebody who's trying to write the fictional thought process of D.B. Cooper, why would he state that they threw Cooper's jacket into the river and the jacket was never found? Because that's not supported by any type of factual evidence, and is also part of the story that it was never found. But I think the narrative that Ray Burns is trying to create is that D.B. Cooper was planting false leads. In 1980, $6,000 was found at Tina Bar from D.B. Cooper's skyjacking, and it was found with rubber bands still attached around it. 3 bundles of bills were found at Tina Bar, and he states that Cooper threw the money into the river directly as a type of false lead, as well as throwing his jacket. And I'm just thinking, there are a couple of problems that I would have with this, and that is that, number one, D.B. Cooper would have had to have touched down very close to Tina Bar, and to the credit of the movie, The Pursuit of D.B. Cooper from 1981, they actually tried to provide an explanation about how all of this could work, because that had Treat Williams jumping out of the plane, and he landed quite a substantial distance from Tina Bar, which is what I think is accurate. And then he got into a strategically placed vehicle, which was a Jeep, and then he drove throughout the Pacific Northwest. He drove relatively close to Tina Bar, and he threw the money into the water as a type of red herring, a false lead, a clue that's going in the wrong direction, or something to confuse the authorities. And by his own admission, in the story, The Confession of D.B. Cooper, that's exactly what Cooper said he did. He wanted to throw a wrench into the plans that had been launched by the authorities. So that's why he put the money into the Columbia River. This would be in the story that's been created by Ray Burns. And some of you might be thinking, you're being overly critical. This guy just wanted to write a fictional story where D.B. Cooper happens to be the character. He probably didn't want any of this stuff hyperanalyzed. And you are perhaps 100% correct, but at the same time, I still think it's really interesting to look at how people would have created the thought process and patterns for D.B. Cooper. And this one just came across as a little bit implausible for me, throwing the money and the jacket into the river as a type of red herring, especially when it's done almost exactly at Tina Bar. Then some more bizarre things happen in the story, and that is that he is talking about how D.B. Cooper's exit plan was to get back to Seattle and then take a different plane to Los Angeles and live in a flea bag motel for a while and not use any money from the skyjacking. When D.B. Cooper was in Seattle, this is the fictional D.B. Cooper, he had a money belt that had his own little scraps of savings that apparently weren't enough to attract a woman, so he decided to go from Seattle to Los Angeles on another plane, and nobody noticed. Changing his hair, I suppose, changing his glasses. Nobody noticed this individual flying from Seattle to Los Angeles. I think that is also a very bizarre choice of an exit plan or a getaway strategy, but I suppose that anything is possible. If we haven't truly identified who D.B. Cooper was, then anything is possible, and those types of things shouldn't be dismissed completely. I just think that those areas and locations would be quite odd. But ultimately, though, I thought that some interesting things happened with the interview that was conducted for The Confession of D.B. Cooper. I repeat, it's a story, and that is that the fictional D.B. Cooper says, "You can publish this. I don't care. You can use my name. I don't care. The authorities have not caught me as of yet," and this is taking place in the new millennium. "Even if they track me down, I'm just going to say that it's fake news and that it's not really true, and they won't catch them." D.B. Cooper was being rather fearless, and I think that that's a fairly accurate way to portray D.B. Cooper. If he didn't care so much about the actions and consequences in 1971, maybe he didn't care in 2001 or 2011 or 2021. So I can completely understand all of those things. Now with the next point, Cooper is somebody who is just kind of moving on with his years, going on about life, and he's also someone who really perhaps didn't get the most amazing life turnaround because of the skyjacking. But I just think that it's always interesting to look at how people would think about these types of criminal figures from a fictional standpoint. If you have any observations at all about the Confession of D.B. Cooper and the stories that I've been telling you about Ray Burns, and his book is available on Amazon. And speaking of Amazon.com, there is also a book that is available for free called D.B. Cooper: Choose Your Own Landing by Smitty Smith. And this is one that is even more fictionalized than the Confession of D.B. Cooper. It's very short. It's like 24 pages long, but it's a choose-your-own-adventure story that's called Choose Your Own Landing. And I was all prepared to read this one. However, I really began to notice that this story was one that had almost just too much silliness for its own benefit. But it is available 100% for free on Amazon. The D.B. Cooper Choose Your Own Landing story by Smitty Smith. And one thing that was stated by the author is that Smitty intentionally wanted this to be made available for free. But the only piece of value that I found from the discussion in D.B. Cooper Choose Your Own Landing was Smitty Smith points out that D.B. Cooper had an enormous amount of time to jump, yet D.B. Cooper jumped relatively close to Seattle. The plane was flying to Reno, yet D.B. Cooper chose to jump almost shortly after the takeoff. That means that perhaps D.B. Cooper wanted to jump in the Pacific Northwest. He didn't want to jump in northern Nevada or close to Reno, which he could have done. He could have also landed in Reno, told the plane to refuel, and then sent him on his way to Mexico. No, he didn't do that. He wanted to jump near the Seattle or Portland areas. I completely agree with that. We're not even talking about the thought process of a fictional character at that point. I think the real D.B. Cooper wanted to jump in the Pacific Northwest, and that's another thing that Ray Burns might be completely spot on about when he says that it's because he was familiar with the terrain. Lots of D.B. Cooper researchers and theorists say things of that nature. Now, with the next thing that I have for you guys here on Cooper Friday, I would like to talk about the book The Skyjacker by Dr. David G. Hubbard. And this is one that looks at the psychological profiles and examinations of 20 different skyjackers, and one of them is named Ronald. He's only referred to by his first name. Ronald was one who launched a skyjacking because he wanted to be one of the skyjackers that goes to Cuba. Cuba was an absolutely a bigger destination for skyjackers than Reno, Nevada, or Mexico. So that's something that sets D.B. Cooper apart from these other skyjackers. And in the book, The Skyjacker by Dr. David G. Hubbard, Ronald's stories are quite similar to the other ones that I've talked to you guys about here on Cooper Friday, but they are just a little bit different. The book, The Skyjacker by Dr. David G. Hubbard, talks about the birth order of children all the time, and it shows that there could be some type of psychological mechanism that is operating within the human brain, or at the very least, it is a pattern where the person is not the oldest or not the youngest. They are dealing with sort of problematic middle child syndrome, problematic middle child behavior. And if you were to just present that to me before Cooper Friday had ever started, before I had ever read any of these books, I would say, well, maybe there's some truth to that, but it's probably not the deepest rooted issue with the Cooper skyjacking. Now, I would say I actually think it's a much, much more important part of it. So if we are looking for the real D.B. Cooper, maybe he was a middle child. So Ronald is born, the second out of 5 children. He grows up in a relatively dysfunctional household because he has an alcoholic father who was not very involved with his children, and this is something that also was reported by Ronald the Skyjacker. When his father was present, he was beating the children. His mother was also a very religious woman. I mean, I can tell you this stuff over and over again. If we look at the patterns and behaviors that have been expressed in Dr. David G. Hubbard's book, middle child, alcoholic father, religious or zealot mother, these are things that just drive people to become skyjackers, or so it would seem. So then the next thing that happens with Ronald is he becomes the victim of sexual abuse when he is 7 years old, by his aunt, actually, by his mother's younger sister, and she's 14 years old at the time, and she forces him into a type of sex act, which affected his behavior in a rather odd way. Now, Ronald is also someone who is a poor student, and, he tries to turn his life around and join the Marine Corps, and he gets married. He gets out of the Marines. He gets a good job. He has a brick house and 2 children, and he says, life is finally about to turn around. But then his wife leaves him for another man and takes the children. And he's like, he was trying so hard to get his life in order, and she left him for somebody else. Granted, we're only hearing one side of the story, but she takes the kids and she leaves. So then he's just like, goodness, I don't believe this. I don't understand this. He starts seeing somebody else, a second woman. And once his divorce goes through, his second girlfriend, we should say, gets pregnant. And he's like, I'll marry you. I'll be the father. I mean, this is my kid, and I want to be part of both your lives. And she says no, she's not going to marry him. But then she takes him to court and sues him, trying to get a paternity test and child support. And he's like, what on earth is happening? I wanted to be involved in my kid's life. I wanted to marry her, and she's taking me to court? And ultimately, he ends up with a third woman who was, by the book's own description, a go-go dancer, and he's trying to make things work with her as well, but he's working 100 hours a week because he's trying to earn money. Almost like the way the guy in the D.B. Cooper confession story is saying he just needs money to attract women, and he's working 100 hours a week at his father's business, mind you, and the business starts performing very well. The business starts doing really well. Then they realize that, this guy's working 100 hours a week. Yes, the company's earning money, but we're also paying him too much money. So he gets fired by his own father and replaced by his brother. And he's like, I just don't believe this. Every time I try to do something in my life, things do not go well. So he decides to become a skyjacker. He wants to skyjack a plane and take it to Cuba. This will be a flight headed toward Miami, and he wanted to do it and go to Cuba. And when he was caught, he stated that he did it because he was a social misfit and he had a terrible life. So with somebody like D.B. Cooper, it's not like he's going to match up exactly with Ronald, but there are these commonalities that do exist within the psychology of skyjacking. Middle child, alcoholic or an abusive father, religious zealot mother, some type of sexual dysfunction, some type of sexual dissatisfaction, if you will, and the desire and need to succeed, being an underperformer in life. And one detail about Ronald's childhood that I thought was really interesting was when his mother wanted to escape, she would take the kids, put them in the car, and just drive for very long distances. And in a previous chapter of The Skyjacker, Dr. David G. Hubbard talks about how he noticed that skyjackers do not mind traveling long distances. That was just something that they experienced. It's almost like this constant escapism or even this need for speed. The two commonalities that were noticed among all of the skyjackers were rigorous walking, and the desire to travel long distances. His mother puts them in the car, drives long distances to get away from the abusive father. Okay, I think that that's an influence. And Ronald was also somebody who was the shoulder to cry on for his mother, the type of emotional crutch. And some of you guys might not really take a liking to hearing this, but it's that when a child is forced to be a type of emotional support for the family member, or when the child is forced to exhibit any type of adult behaviors for a family member, that can be emotional abuse. It might not be calculated, it might not be some grand mischievous plan, and it might not even be sadistic. The parent might think that they're doing a good thing, but it can create an emotionally abusive relationship with the child. Even if there's this, I'll just tell you, there's this one scenario that was shared with me that if the mother dies, and at the funeral the father starts leaning on his daughter the way that he did with his wife, who has now passed away, even if she's trying to console him genuinely, that can form a type of emotionally abusive bond in the daughter's mind. Anything that forces children to act like adults when they're not ready to act like adults can be emotionally abusive. I'm not 100% sold on that. I'm just sharing different things that I've heard from psychology videos on YouTube. But I would love to know what you guys think about the story of Ronald. I would love to know what you guys think about D.B. Cooper. What did you think about the persona and the personality of D.B. Cooper that had been created by Ray Burns? And that book and story is called The Confession of D.B. Cooper. It's a short story that's available, and you can get this on Amazon.com. And as far as The Skyjacker goes, I'm really going to try and look at making a very big presentation at the end of the year, looking at all of these observations about the psychological profile of skyjacking, so please hit the like button and subscribe to BBO War, and if you want to hear more about D.B. Cooper, tune in every Friday for another episode. That's all from me now. I am your host, Black Box Ned. You guys know where to write the show, blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com, BlackBoxNed88 on TikTok and Instagram, and I'll see you over there. Until next time.